Friends, I'm delighted to be back with you after a 2-week hiatus. Who is joining us? I am very excited to be back in this chair with a glass of wine in hand. It's been a 2-week hiatus, as I said, with a little bit of a family vacation and not a whole lot of wine, as we weren't around wine, doing some camping. So happy to be back tasting some wines today. And this one is very expressive right off the bat. So hoping you're all enjoying your summers as well. Looking forward to connecting once again with those of you who are going to be with us tonight. Tasting this. It's got a very prominent nose, which we'll get to in just a second. Chime in if you're with us. Let me know who's here. I can see a few people are just joining on. And Erica, you're joining us back as well, which is fantastic. Happy to have you with us this evening. Hope you're doing very well. Something very alluring about the nose. And happy you have the wine too, Eric. What are you seeing in this wine and smelling? Kathy, good evening to you. This is going to be a fascinating one. It has, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but right off the bat, it smelled to me like if I had closed my eyes, or if you had one of those tasting glasses that's black, so you don't actually get to see color and get biased by color, it smelled like Chardonnay to me. It smelled like malolactic fermentation, like diacetyl, like buttered corn, popcorn, movie popcorn, which is a fascinating aroma to find in a red wine. So, Candy, Kathy, Kevin, good evening. Eric is here tonight. Thank you. And your dad. Hey, welcome. Glad to have you guys with us. Rob and Kathy are here with Shannon. And Chris, you're playing all the way from Sarasota. Awesome, man. You have a lovely Spanish garnacha, or are you already commenting that this is a lovely Spanish garnacha? Right out of the gate, a call about this wine or what you are drinking. We should put Spanish garnacha, regardless, into the possible options for this particular wine this evening. David and Allison, hello. How are you? I saw that you guys took a trip recently down toward Charlottesville, I think. Did more of a spirited trip, if you will, not a wine tasting trip. And Kristen, good evening. Kestenbaums are here. I had a wonderful vacation, thank you. The upper part of Michigan, we were in the Upper Peninsula with my wife's family, and it is a special place. Wow, it is beautiful. Crystal clear lakes that border unbelievable sandy beaches and dunes, and then behind those dunes you find just fantastic forests with rivers and creeks and waterfalls, and maybe we're just especially fortunate, but 75 degree weather with no humidity and very little rain for the entire week. It was awesome. So Trish, Andy, and Kathy, good evening. Allison, yeah, we carry Ragged Branch. They do some awesome work. Beautiful bourbons, all of them, from the wheated to the rye, cool stuff that they're doing, and the cattle farm and operation there too. So Bobby and Jan, welcome. Great to have you tonight too. So Erica, you're picking up eucalyptus and some berry. I literally just cracked it and poured it, and that's what came out in the nose. So I don't know if it's still present a little bit for me. The Millettes are here, and Jan is with us. Hi. All right, guys. So what do we got? What have we here? For those of you that don't have it at home, we're drinking a red. What do you see in the way of color? Reorienting ourselves, getting back to the basics. In my case, as I've been away from tasting. It's a clear wine, right? It's not hazy. It has sort of a medium intensity, right? It's not super deep. It's definitely not pale or light. Erica was picking up some blackberries and darker berries, and Kathy's adding to that some black pepper and eucalyptus. So there's a minty quality for some of you. Eucalyptus, that mentholy element, which usually is an indicator that you have some of that growing in and around the vineyard that the grapes are harvested from, and oftentimes it's a tell for me from perhaps a place in California or Australia. I get a lot of eucalyptus a lot of times. Great. Jan, you're picking up a garnet color. Thank you for keeping me heading in that direction. Yeah, right. So kind of a medium, not quite deep intensity. The color is more on the garnet kind of spectrum. Garnet, kind of a little bit of ruby. From a distance, it looks a little bit purplish to me, and then you get closer, and around the rim is more that garnet ruby element kind of is more there. Erica's picking up a little bit of nutmeg, and Kathy, you got the mint right away. Sorry, Kathy got the mint right away, which Candy's vouching for. And Christine, hello. Christine is my wife's aunt, so that's my in-law aunt as well, and we visited her in Michigan. So hello, Christine. Great to have you here, and hopefully Gary's behind you. If he is, say hi. Gary made some dynamite salmon for us when I was there. Yeah, so a little bit of mintiness, a little bit of dark fruit, dark cherry. Quite the series of aromas that would be leading us with a black pepper, kind of leading and profiling sounds like a little bit of Shiraz potentially. So, and that kind of buttered popcorn element that I picked up early would be maybe an indication of some very new oak or some oak that's added to the wine, and you could get that certainly in Australia that way. So eucalyptus is really prominent for you guys. I'm not getting as much eucalyptus as I am that kind of diacetyl element, so interesting. Erica, you're making a spiced wine kit. That's awesome. That's a hell of a DIY project at home, but a really good one. For those that don't know, a little smelling kit, so you could kind of reference and build your smell and taste palette for wine tasting by being able to smell what blackcurrants smell like. That would be a really great project. I know they sell them commercially, but kind of cool to put one of your own ones together. So yeah, that might be, if you have that next to you, you might be thrown off a little bit by what you're smelling around you. Or on the flip side, you could smell the wine and kind of reference what you're smelling and try to find exactly what we're smelling. So they are very expensive too, Erica. Yes, I hear you in terms of wanting to do it yourself. That's pretty cool too. I think it's a great exercise. You learn more by putting them together and picking out what you're putting in and making sure that they really reference the wines that you're drinking and tasting. Dave Pearson, you're picking up a little spearmint. So from menthol to eucalyptus to mint, spearmint, there's a minty element here. Great. All right. So a lot of aroma. Tons of fruit. We have sort of a little bit less in the way of kind of an earthen note, right? We have some wood potentially in the way of the spice profile. And then we have some of that herbal element in the way of the mintiness, which could be just in the vineyard translating through the fruit itself. Maybe it's a little bit of the wood treatment perhaps, but let's taste and see if any of that comes through. And then begin to look at what wines we should be considering. That's fun. What do you taste, guys? Let's talk about taste before we get into flavor. But is this wine dry? How's the acidity on the wine? Where are we at with the tannin? How's the alcohol? What's the texture or body of this wine like? And how long is the finish? Is it dry? And usually you pick that up on the back end of what you're tasting. I'm noting for later in just a second, we'll kind of get to cedar from the Burses and smells like Germany, Austria from Nicole, dark fruit, black pepper, licorice, a little bit of smoke, quite robust. Yep. So robust being a body kind of descriptor, so a little higher alcohol. I'm getting a little bit of a burn on the back of my throat coming from a touch more of the alcohol that I think this has. Tannins are a little bit more moderate, right? Some chocolate and coffee flavors from Eric. Eric, is that you or just your dad, or you both kind of agreeing with that? It is dry but velvety. Yeah, it has a real plush fruit character to it, doesn't it? The fruitiness, and then the acid being kind of medium, maybe a tiny bit medium plus, makes it sort of juicy, doesn't it? Erica, exactly. The acidity at the finish lingers in a way that kind of lifts the wine up because it has that plushness, that roundness, a little bit of tannin, and an overall round mouthfeel. Mm. It's not terribly tannic, is it? It has some softer and kind of more in the background. It's not something that's super prominent up front. Yeah. Anybody getting that mintiness on the actual palate? Because we've got the fruit component, we've got more of that kind of black pepper, some more of that smoke, some cocoa chocolate, maybe coffee type aroma, flavor, excuse me. I get some of that mintiness on the palate. This reminds me a lot of Australian wine. The note was made earlier too about German or Austria, which is good. A little bit salty, David. Cool. I think maybe that's, yeah, there is a sort of like 3/4 of the way through the experience is where it becomes that the acid and that saltiness kind of kicks in and amplifies the rest of the wine, also making it one that you want to have the next taste of. Katie, you're picking up a cedar spearmint kind of quality at the finish. I think there's definitely a profile of some wood on this wine, right? Ample fruit, moderate plus acid, but then also kind of a more robust, ripe profile. And as a result, does that take us to a place that's a little bit more cool in climate or a place that's a little bit warmer in climate? And I think that's where Kathy was kind of heading with her comment there. So perfect segue that way. It might smell a little bit like Germany, Austria, but when you taste it, it doesn't necessarily present like a cooler climate production like you'd find in Austria and Germany typically. Tastes a little bit riper. Chris, you're picking up a little bit of licorice and some plum. I definitely got some of that licoricey note on the nose, right past that sort of woody note. And some of that licorice, like my first initial sniff rather was kind of slightly Oregon, kind of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir-ish. The texture and everything else we've described would take me away from there, but there's that licorice quality that sometimes I pick up in the Willamette Valley. Erica, nice. So there's confectionery elements here, like brown sugar. There's raisins, so very ripe, sweet, caramelized sugar into sugars that have molasses in them, so darker roast elements. So very ripe elements and elements that are advanced sugar. That's not just refined white sugar. This is a deeper tonal kind of sugar. Susan, welcome, and been listening on your phone. That's great. It works usually. Chris is saying that he thinks a little warmer climate and has a little bit more of a high alcohol. I think you get a bit of the alcohol burn on the back of the palate after you've taken a sip, but it's pretty well balanced and it holds itself well, and it doesn't have a real aggressive tannin, and that kind of helps the wine stay, I think, just a little bit more silky and elegant. Eric is picking up a little black tea. So black tea, menthol elements, mint elements, cocoa, coffee, blackberries, smoke, black pepper. All of that could take us to Australian Shiraz, maybe a Shiraz Cabernet blend, somewhere like McLaren Vale or Coonawarra or maybe Barossa. But I've been harping on Australia. Where else should we consider? Where else are you going to find some usage of oak, ripe fruit profile, moderate to moderate plus acidity, lower tannin, but pretty ripe? So a robust wine, so a higher alcohol wine. Maybe we're looking at 14%. And I think, yeah, Bobby, for sure, we should be considering Cabernet Sauvignon, especially because of that tea element. But we're getting some site signatures by way of the menthol, eucalyptus, the minty element. West Coast California, West Coast Washington. California, I agree. I think we could be, what if we're in somewhere Central Coast, or are we in Central Valley? Are we in something like Lodi, Sierra Foothills, somewhere like Mendocino, a little bit more north, where you're going to get a higher acidity, but some ripeness potential too. Thinking perhaps that we need the warmth that it comes from a warm climate, but there's a higher acidity here that we need some of that freshness, and to account for that, maybe we need something coastal, maybe for that salinity, maybe we need something a little bit higher in elevation so that it maintains freshness, it maintains acidity as it gets riper, and the eucalyptus element could certainly be there. So could we be talking about Petit Syrah? We had thrown that out a couple tastings ago. Cabernet, Syrah or Shiraz, Petit Syrah. That would be fun. Jan's thinking Australia with me. Almost every time we think Australia, I think we should condition ourselves to at least think about South Africa and whether or not we could be dealing with something in South Africa. Syrah, Cabernet, blends, put that element together. So where else? Anything else that we would want to consider? And I don't remember who threw out Germany, Austria, but are you still finding that in Germany, Austria? It sounds very much like we're all kind of headed more New World than we are in the Old World. Chris threw out Spanish Garnacha by way of the fact that I think he's just drinking it now, Chris Perman. So is there anything about this that suggests Spain or Italy or France, Old World kind of production, Austria, Germany, or is it really pretty clearly New World? Chile, cool. Chris throwing out Chile. Yeah, this has a New World profile to it. If we're talking Chile, are you thinking Cabernet from Chile, Chris? There's definite potential for all of these New World places to be considered. As I'm letting it linger a little bit, do you pick up a touch of not so much pyrazine as kind of an astringency that might come from a blend of fruit, a blend of picking times, maybe a little stem element. So David Pearson's saying that he's thinking Old World, but not sure why necessarily. David, like, so we kind of go Old World. The acidity often takes us there, and this wine has that acidity, so that's an appropriate kind of thought to go Old World on that. But it has an overtness about the fruit profile that takes me away from the Old World and puts me more in the New World. And the presence and the kind of signature presence of oak also takes me more into a New World production. For Erica and for Kathy, they're both hanging out with Shiraz in Australia. Matthew's asking about New Zealand. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to consider Australia, why not consider New Zealand? Although for myself, why I didn't jump to New Zealand is that there's a ripeness and an easiness about this that New Zealand oftentimes presents more on a kind of a linear quality or a harder edged quality to it, a little bit more vervy, and that makes it for this type of wine. I would, if I was drinking Shiraz from New Zealand or Cabernet, as I've tried before, they just have a sinewy quality about them that this wine does not have, and is presenting more ripeness than you'd get typically from New Zealand. Blackberry, cherry, licorice, as Chris is pointing out, is a good tell for Syrah, and other notes have been put out in terms of smoke and black pepper, and that takes you all to Shiraz or Syrah, and for me that menthol, eucalyptus, minty note. It's going to be hard to walk away from Australia for me. But so going back, I wouldn't find this could have Cabernet in it. It could have an element of that, especially with that tea quality, and there is a broadness to it. Although I don't know if there's enough structure to be dominantly Cabernet in this. I think it's more about Shiraz than it would be about Cabernet, and thus I don't know that you'd get that profile for example, from Chile. You could. I'm not sure you'd get that. I don't recall getting any kind of menthol mintiness in Chile. And the oak usage with the fruit kind of in concert. I think Chile answers some of the acid potential, but I'm not sure about the rest. West Coast, I think you could make that argument pretty good, for sure. I'm not sure it would be a Shiraz or Syrah blend. Might go more Petite Sirah, kind of something like that. If we're talking about South Africa, you certainly could get blends that probably would approximate this. But just the softness and the overall profile, this just tastes to me and smells kind of more like Australia. I'm trying to parse that out for you. It's got a very lush texture, and I think that's part of what has got me going with Shiraz. But same as Susan. So 3 minutes in, this is the point at which the wine changes usually a little bit. Anybody picking up something different, finding that this wine changed for you, or has given something else to consider, something, a new clue revealed about where we want to take this wine? Kathy, you're guessing, Kathy and Candy are guessing Aussie Cab, Sauv, Shiraz. Yep. Australia with a Shiraz blend for Susan, so we're all kind of in that camp. Chris, I wasn't getting as much eucalyptus either on the nose. Quite a few folks in the beginning were only picking up that eucalyptus mintiness. I'm getting it more on the palate than on the nose. And the nose for me had this really interesting kind of buttered popcorn signature that is fascinating to find in a red. So for me, the wine's staying pretty consistent. It's not necessarily giving a whole lot more different, but it's maintained what it's been presenting for the last 20 minutes or so. A lot of raisin on the nose for Susan, so giving you some dried notes, and you get that heat and warmth. If we're talking, say, the Barossa Valley, for example, in Australia, you get warmth on that valley floor. And Kathy, you and Jan are pushing the discussion toward the vintage 2017. So a little bit of age, 4 years. So between 2 and 5, kind of 2 and 4 being younger, a younger wine. It has a little bit of that rim variation kind of setting in, not a ton. And we saw some of that tawny element, some of that kind of garnet around the rim. So maybe it's heading into being a little bit older with a slight resolution of tannin, or maybe it's just a youthful, kind of cheerful, easygoing red that isn't all that tannic with a bunch of extraction. So there's still, for me, the mintiness is continuing to maintain there, and the red fruit, the dark fruit, yeah. 17, 18. I would be surprised if it is as new as 19, but 3, 4 years old. And it's a fun example of the wine for sure. Chris, I agree, it's a nice, tasty wine. All right, folks. It sounds like the bulk of us, anyway, are all sort of headed to the land of Oz, to Down Under, with a Syrah or Shiraz dominant wine. Maybe there's a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon in it. So let's talk about that for a minute. If there was Cabernet in this, and it was dominant or structured, if it was a prominent kind of addition of Cabernet, would we get more tannin? Would we get a little bit more structure in this presentation? I think what many of you have noted in terms of its roundness, its plushness, but its silkiness, its easiness, its smoothness, kind of indicates that there's not a lot of Cabernet, if there is any, and it could be just Shiraz. That's maybe where I will head. So I think I'm headed more just toward Shiraz than with the Cabernet. But there were some elements we talked about in the way of that tea and plum elements that might bring in something like Cabernet. But I think based on its overall profile, it's a little bit lower kind of exhibition of tannin. I'm going to stick away from the Cabernet myself and just say Shiraz. It has gotten a little bit more fruit forward. It definitely jumped out with some of its secondary characteristics and then had the fruit there and just pushed all the way through. Nicole, you're in Australia too. So in Australia, though, if we're talking about the valley floor of Barossa, for example, warm, we're going to get this warmth, but then we're going to have to somehow contend with or talk about how we got that acid and that bright, vibrant quality to it. So maybe they're picking a little bit early on some of it to maintain freshness and some riper quality on another portion and blending the two together, and that's what's giving us a little bit of that tea element, some of that herbal element, some of that underripe element, and then we've got some of the ripe element coming together, and putting those things together, you get a freshness with the fruit. So okay, I'm going to go 2018 Australian Shiraz. I think we get a general designation Australian, but South Australia perhaps, Barossa Valley, but I think this is a fun example of that varietal in that place. It has that heat, but it carries it well. Let's see. Howard Park, Great Southern Flint Rock Syrah. Very cool. Yep, so Great Southern being a kind of a broader classification of the Great Southern of Western Australia, continental climate, so a little bit more coastal. And yeah, we've gotten Shiraz, right, or Syrah. Flint Rock Syrah 2017. So good job, Kathy and Jan, as you're picking up the 17 factor here. This is Australian Shiraz, but a little bit more coastal, and so maybe that's where that freshness is coming in. And fun wine. Kathy, thank you for throwing that in there. Yeah, the Great Southern is just east of Margaret River on the west side, so you're getting that coastal influence, and that's keeping it a little bit more fresh, or at least giving us, I think, perhaps some of where the acidity is coming from. Very cool. That's a fun wine to try. And I'm just curious, from the alcohol standpoint, we're at 14. So, generally you find that in the case of Australian Shiraz, sometimes it's 14.5 or higher. So it could be more. In this case too, the label gives you some room to play, but I don't think it's much more. It's presenting itself very well that way. So great, David. I'm so glad to hear you enjoyed this. One of the best Shiraz you've tried. Yeah, Australian Shiraz Syrah is super alluring. It is. It's a delicious entry point to Syrah, and pretty much doesn't necessarily taste like any Syrah or Shiraz anywhere else. You get references to it, of course, but wow, it's fun. Definitely delicious at this price point, and you are most welcome, Nicole, always. This is just fun to do. I agree, Susan. I think your classification is probably the best one there. It's yummy. I mean, I put my nose in it first, and from the first sniff to the final sip so far, it's just tasty. It's compelling. You want to drink some more of it. So I hope you all do enjoy the rest of the bottle that you have. And if you wish to have more, I believe we have some more. You can certainly do that. And as Chris points out, it's a solid wine for 25 bucks that you just put around the house, and it goes with everything. I mean, it's a big wine, but it's a wine that you would be happy to drink during the summertime. It's a wine you'd be happy to drink during the wintertime. It's just one of those great wines that sits comfortably because of that low tannin element, but a bold roundness that's pleasing to the palate. It's a great option. So, well, we're so glad to have you back, Erica. I'm so glad to be back. Wonderful tasting with all of you. And I look forward to doing it again next week as we dive into another wine. I don't know what it is, so we'll find it out together as we venture to that point. Until then, enjoy your week, enjoy this bottle, and I'll see you next Thursday. Cheers, everybody.